Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to our INSEAD Tech Talk today. I am Kaisa Snellman, Associate Professor of Organizational Behavior and Associate Dean of Diversity and Inclusion here at INSEAD, and I will be hosting the session today. Today's webinar is part of the Tech Talk X series by Digital at INSEAD, dedicated to exploring new digital technologies, their applications, as well as their impact on management, business, and society. For more information, please visit the Digital at INSEAD websites. And a big thank you for our sponsor, Accenture. Let me do a quick welcome to our guest speaker today, my wonderful, amazing colleague, Michaël Bikard. Michaël is Associate Professor of Strategy here at INSEAD, award-winning scholar who studies the diffusion of ideas and how time and context shape the fate of ideas. Over to you, Michaël.
Thank you very much, Kaisa. It is a wonderful pleasure to be here to present this paper that is joint work with Isabel Fernandez Mateo at London Business School and an incredible PhD student we have here at INSEAD, Ronak Mogra. So this paper is not my first paper, but over the time, I think it's become, a key paper that I'm working on for at least two reasons. The first one is that it is, I think, by far the most depressing paper I've worked on. All right, so if you're interested in depressing science, then great, stay tuned. The second thing is that I think the implications for a paper like this are actually quite clear in a way that many papers don't produce implications that are so clear and potentially quite profound. So let me start perhaps by telling you a story. And if you've been following the scientific or technology news in the past few years, you certainly have already heard about that incredible woman, Dr. Kathleen Karikó. Karikó was born in the 50s in communist Hungary, and she grew up in a small town. Her dad was a butcher, her mom a shopkeeper. They were in a very modest home without electricity, no fridge, no running water, no fridge, no TV. Apparently, her dad was in part there because he'd been punished because he had been taking part in the '56 Budapest uprising. So she did not grow up in the nicest possible environment, but little Kathleen was very curious and a very smart student and hardworking student, and through her sheer intellect managed to bring herself to become to be hired in a top lab in Budapest. So by the mid 1980s, she was working in such a lab. But it was the end of the Cold War in the 80s. It was a tough time. The lab ran out of money, and she got out of a job. And so at that point, she and her husband decided they had to escape. They sold their car in the black market, and with the $1,000 they got for it, they hid it in the teddy bear of their 2-year-old daughter to escape and go to America. And at that point, you might have thought, okay, now they're in America, things will go well, things will go better, right? But it really didn't. She started her scientific career in America at Temple University, and things did not work well. No one was paying attention to what she was doing. She couldn't get grants. She couldn't get published. Eventually, she had to move. She went to University of Pennsylvania, still in Philadelphia. And again, things did not go well. No one paid attention to what she was doing. She could not get grants. She could not get published. Eventually, it was so bad that people at UPenn tried to get rid of her. They demoted her in the middle of a cancer scare in 95, hoping she would leave. But she had nowhere to go. So she stayed, kept her head down, kept working. And things started finally looking up by the late 1990s, around 97, 98, when at a copy machine, she just ran into an investigator called Drew Weissman. And they started talking about research and decided to try what she had been wanting to do for a long time. And eventually, that conversation led into a series of breakthrough papers that eventually led to a series of breakthrough technologies that many of us have actually injected in ourselves, because those were the COVID vaccines, the famous mRNA COVID vaccines. Now, it's an incredible story of hardship and redemption, and I hope that someone in Hollywood one day will just like do a movie about her life, because it's just such a cool story. And there is a lot of things that can be learned from it, a lot of takeaways. One thing that these stories actually, one of the questions that these stories raise for me is, would things have gotten easier for her had she been a man? Is it possible that she would have gotten more attention, that potentially her paper would have gotten published faster, or she would have gotten grant faster? Is it possible that if she had been a man, we would have got this discovery sooner and those technologies sooner? And is it possible that just because it was a woman, that actually cost the life of thousands of people that died from COVID while waiting for a good vaccine? That if she had been a man, potentially we would have gotten that vaccine years earlier and many lives would have been saved. I think that's one way to think about the question in the background of this paper. So this paper is really about understanding how gender inequality affect inventors, people involved in technology, and their attention to ideas. In this case, we're going to be looking at scientific ideas. We have 3 studies plus interviews. I'll get into each of them in turn. And the one key result is that it looks like people involved in technology development are a lot less aware of ideas coming from women. Now, the first question, if you want to study a question like this, is how are we going to measure inventors' awareness? Are we going to just talk to those people, do surveys? How can you know that, how can you have a big sample? How can you, if you talk to them, how do you know that there is no recall bias? And so I think the one fundamental part of this paper is really finding a way to measure inventors' awareness of ideas at scale. And luckily, there is a way to do that, and it is by focusing on US patent citation to scientific papers. Now, it turns out if you look at what a US patent looks like, it will cite a bunch of documents. And specifically, it will cite sometimes, not always, a bunch of scientific papers. And those scientific papers give us an indication of what are the scientific ideas that that inventor at that time felt were important or somehow relevant to the work that they were doing. Now, if you just look at one patent, you can't learn that much. But imagine that you could look at every patent ever. Then that would start, you start being able to paint a picture of inventors' awareness of scientific ideas. And that was a fundamental idea underlying this paper is like, okay, let's look at every patent and let's track which ideas these people have been paying attention to. And so we started by using the entire scientific literature, talking about 70 million papers, and the entire patent literature, US patent literature, and just look at the extent to which scientific papers are cited in patents, depending on whether the main authors in those scientific papers is a man or a woman. And what we find was sobering. There is a massive difference. You can see that in the upper left corner here. The magnitude is very significant. But just as important is the fact that this doesn't seem to be evolving over time. So it's a very, very stable gender gap here in patent citations. And I think what shocked me the most here is how ubiquitous it is, right? I may have, if you had asked me before, I may have expected this to be maybe more salient in more male-dominated fields like, say, math or physics, and potentially less salient in fields that have a lot more women, like in the life sciences or in psychology. But that's not what we find. We find that this gap is ubiquitous, and it's true whether you look at physics, biology, psychology, history, every field, we see this gap. Now, okay, we've established now that ideas, scientific ideas from women tend to be used less for technology development, or at least people involved in technology development are less aware of those ideas. But you might be thinking, okay, but we're comparing apple and oranges here. Maybe women just work on more basic stuff. So that was the key here. Can we find a way to account for that and somehow know that this is actually not driven by women working on different kinds of projects? And so the fundamental idea here is to do a different study. And in that study, instead of looking at a very broad picture of the whole of science and the whole of technology, we're going to be focusing on very specific cases, but those are cases where men and women make the same discovery around the same time. So let me give you an example. In the winter of 2002, two teams of scientists simultaneously discovered the HBL gene and how it could be regulated by, I think, microRNAs. This discovery had important implications for the development of new therapeutic. Yet, one of these teams was led by a man and the other one by a woman. When two teams make the same discovery around the same time and send their paper for publications, both papers can actually get published, forming what we call paper twins. And just like real twins, people twins, have been used for decades to disentangle the impact of the gene from the impact of the environment around these genes, we can use those idea twins to disentangle the impact of the idea itself, how useful it is for technology development, from the environment around those ideas, in this case, the gender of the investigator. Right? In a sense, what we're trying to do here is a twin study of idea. And so in practice, what we did is focus on, I think, about 80 pairs of twins. In fact, there are some triplets and quadruplets. So we're talking about 82 simultaneous discoveries and 185 papers, and track the patent citations to those twins. And here you see again a massive gender gap, in fact, even bigger than in the large data set I showed you earlier. I'm only showing you summary statistics. If you're interested in the actual regression down in the paper, I think it's one of those rare cases where you can just see the whole story in descriptive statistics. Okay, so now we've established two things. First is that there's a huge gender gap in inventors' awareness of scientific ideas across the board in every field over time. And it's even true when men and women have the same idea, right? So the natural next question is why? Why is that? And so there's two, I suppose, candidate categories of explanation. One that we refer to as supply side mechanism, which is maybe there's something different about those scientists, right? Potentially, you could imagine that men have access to more resources, perhaps they're in more prestigious institutions, potentially they have a better network, they have more time. There's a lot of candidate explanation for why this could be driven by the supply side. So we looked at it and we found no evidence that this is driven by the supply side. This does not mean that supply side drivers don't exist or don't matter. It just means that in our data, we did not find evidence for it. Now, the alternative, if it's not the supply, then it has to be the demand, right? Is it possible that for some reason, inventors are not aware of the work done by women, or less so than men, potentially because they don't pay attention to it, or they feel like it's less important? Right? So to look at that in detail, we felt like we had to run yet a different empirical strategy. And in this case, we did an online experiment, if you want, whereby we had 400 participants that all of them had a doctorate in biology or medicine. And we asked them to assess the value of this abstract, right? Now, they all saw the same abstract with the same title, and they had the same questions. The only thing that changed was the first name of the PI, of the principal investigator. Some people saw it as Sarah Anderson or Elizabeth Anderson, and other people randomly saw it as David Anderson or Richard Anderson, right? So that was the only thing we changed. And I must tell you, this was a pre-registered experiment. I fully expected that we'll find nothing, right? I just could not even imagine that the first name would have an impact on what people thought about the abstract. And you know what? Well, we found something. We actually found that people spend more time reading the paper when the first name was a man than when it was a woman, and that they felt it was more important, right? So I promised you depressing science. That's what I meant. So to sum up, this is a paper we're really interested in understanding how do gender inequality impact ideas in general, and certainly ideas at the interface between science and technologies. And to look at that in detail, we conducted 3 studies plus interviews, and we found consistent evidence that ideas that are authored by men receive more attention, or at least are more in the mind of people developing new technologies than ideas coming from women, right? And that's true across field over time when people have the same idea. And we found also evidence that it's probably driven, at least in part, by demand-side mechanism. And by that, I mean what happens on the side of the people involved in technology development as opposed to the people doing the science or people having the ideas. So if I want to take one thing away from a paper like this, it would be that, if you want a faster innovation and fairer world, we need to judge ideas by their quality and not by their author. And I just want to very briefly circle back to the Carico story, right? This idea that if she had been a man having the same idea and everything had been the same, potentially lives could have been saved, right? This idea that, well, imagine a world in which ideas were actually judged purely based on their quality as opposed to based on their authors. How many lives could be saved that are currently that we're currently losing just because of a bias like this? And so I suppose my hope for this paper is that it can help us, it can contribute for us to change the status quo and potentially have more a fair world and also accelerate technological innovation. That's it. Thank you.
Wow, just wow. What a fascinating and, as Michaël said, a depressing paper. Now, my mind is going through zillions of questions, and I'm sure that you in the audience have questions as well. So take your time, put the questions in the chat, and we will make time for Michaël to answer some of them. So, all right, there's so much to unpack here, frankly. But can we start with the geeky question that I have? We're both scientists, so let's talk about methods. So I find this, the paper twins methodology super fascinating, but you must have a backstory to that. Like, how did you come up with this? Like, you've used it in other papers too, so this is not your first rodeo.
No.
Anything there that you can share with the audience, because I'm sure that they're dying to know.
Yeah, no, it was a big part of my dissertation. I remember when I started my PhD, and it was a long time ago, almost, gosh.
Yes, let's not reveal our ages.
Not quite 20 years ago, but almost there, right? I remember pitching. So I was at MIT at the time, and I was very interested in how science can create economic value and how we can turn scientific ideas into economic activity and jobs and wealth. And I remember pitching my advisor at the time, Fiona Murray, and I was like, oh, maybe we should just look at why is it that Paris does such great science and Boston does such great science, but it looks like a lot of the wealth is being created in Boston, not in Paris. Why is that? And she looked at me with a lot of oh, you're cute, but no. So it's like, look, you're comparing oranges and apples. Like here, you can't compare what's happening in both places. Everything moves. You can't do science like this. This is not how you do science. And so she completely shut down my idea, which is what an advisor should do, and she did it very well. But that kind of question kind of stayed in the back of my mind. And a few years later, when I read about Robert K. Merton's work, a sociologist at Columbia, on scientific multiples, this idea that people have the same idea at the same time, I had a little bit of a moment, aha moment. I was just like, oh, wait. Fiona has told me that like you can't do that because you're comparing things that are not the same. But if Merton is right, then potentially you could compare the same thing. You just need to identify instances where the same ideas emerge in different environments. And I went to pitch almost everybody that idea. Oh, I want to do that for my dissertation. And everybody told me it was a very bad idea. Or it was impossible. It was one or the other. So I was quite lost for a while and I was very lucky that around that time, Scott Stern joined MIT. And Scott, when I pitched it to him, he felt like, oh, this is a great idea. You'll do it, do that. And at that point, I was like, Scott, I want to do it, but I don't know how. And he was like, you're smart. You figure it out. And
So how did you
I
go
know,
from
right?
the great but impossible to great yet doable? So what was the aha moment that
Yeah.
clicked?
So I read everything. I read everything that had ever been written on twins, on those simultaneous discoveries, and it was not that big, but it took me a few months. And eventually, in one obscure paper, a book written by a woman called Susan Cousins, who I actually later learned was actually a PhD student from Robert K. Merton, she did an ethnography of the discovery of the opiate receptor by 3 teams. And what she was interested in is how is credit shared when 3 teams made the same discovery. And she realized that um, the scientific community essentially votes on who deserves credit through their citations. And so when I saw her describe this, I was like, aha, if they vote about who deserves credit for the idea, then I can use those votes to identify twins. And so that was the fundamental breakthrough was, okay, I can identify those by looking at systematic co-citation in the same parenthesis or adjacently. And so then the rest was a very painful and long path toward making it happen, considering all the challenges. And it was hard, and I had to hire 7 different teams to do it, etc. I'm not going to get into the details, but eventually it led me to produce the first data set of paper twins and started my, as you said, my journey of doing twin study of ideas. And potentially that's just one step in that journey. I've looked at other things beyond gender. But it feels like it's actually a really good nail for this hammer, in fact.
So do you have any advice for some emerging, young scholars out there who would like to use this methodology? Like, do you have anything on your website that would point them to the right direction? Like, what is one to do if you want to construct a data set like this?
Oh, that's such a great question. So I have published a data set.
Well, there you go.
There you go. And
No
so
need to reinvent the wheel.
we no need to really go through that pain that I went through. The data set is freely available if you have issues. So it's published together with a 2020 SMJ paper that describes the method and summarizes the whole literature and kind of highlight what are some of the questions we could potentially tackle using this method. This is all available online, and if you have any issues situating it, just shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to tell you everything I know about this.
Great. What a generous deal you're offering. Not just the data, but also some questions to study. So quickly, everybody online to search for the data set. Let's talk about surprises. So as you mentioned, this is not your first study on ideas and innovation and diffusion of ideas. You did mention that you were surprised to actually get, a finding in your experiment. I think that is a sentiment shared by many of us who run experiments. When it works, you're relieved and slightly surprised. Were there any other surprises?
Yeah. So I think there were a few big surprises. Actually, the main effect was not one of them. I expected to see inventors cite papers written by men more, mostly based on prior literature. one of the big surprise for me was to see how general it was, that it was in every field. I thought it would be the true in physics, but I did not think it would be true in history or psychology, where there's like more women than men in some fields. And yet we see the same thing. So that was a surprise. As I say, that like the online experiment, I was actually writing in my mind. We did that as a response to a reviewer, and I think you and I talked about that at that time. And you helped me think through what is the right way to do this experiment. I had written in my mind my response to the reviewers, explaining why we don't find anything. And then we found something. It was just like, oh my God, I really thought we would find nothing. And in fact, after we ran the experiment, we had to tell the participants what we were actually measuring. We got angry emails
from the
participant saying, of course, gender doesn't matter. Of course, it doesn't matter. And then we look at the result, they're like, well, actually, you know what? It looks like it does.
Yeah.
It's very counterintuitive that such a small manipulation of like just changing the first name from David to Sarah just like leads to like people spending less time reading the abstracts or feeling that the idea is less important. It's depressing and it's shocking.
I think you're describing something that a lot of us who work on gender inequalities, doing experiments, sort of go through this like moment of like, whoa, it worked, and look at that, significant results. And at the same time, we are like, oh, it worked.
Yeah.
The world is actually, just as bad as I thought it was, or even worse.
Yeah, I was somehow in a comfortable position at the time that I was running this, because I knew that the paper did not depend on it. Like we were, I think, second round or third round. We were just like pretty advanced. It felt like we had to do it just to make the reviewer happy. But even if there was no result, I think that would have been part of the story. It just so happens that there was signal here. It was just not all noise. It was shocking.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned many things that you thought might be contributing to these differences, and you say they still might be at play, but they are not the explanation, like universities where they're located, access to resources, the types of networks. But if we think about other sort of external things, so not just connected to the scientists, but sort of the broader society and the institutions around them, media, funding agencies. What do you think, what type of role do they play in generating these biases? So conference invitations, the way that media talks about women, do they play a role, or do you think that they go into the same bucket of like, yeah, they could be, but it's not really a major
No,
story?
it's very hard, and especially when we start going beyond what is in the study, right? So I can talk with a lot of confidence of the work we've done, because we were very thorough and we're very confident in the results. But everything that goes beyond this is speculation.
Or the next study.
Oh, the next study, exactly. I think from my understanding of the current literature where we are at for scientists doing research on those things, we need to understand the world from the point of inventors or people developing technology. They have limited bandwidth. They are trying to come up with the future. And they have a lot of ideas they could potentially pursue or build on. And so they don't see everything. There's a lot of blind spots. They do their best, right, to build on the highest shoulders they can. And so we need to remember that, like, from their standpoint, I don't think, and like nowhere in the paper, we actually don't even talk about bias, but we definitely don't talk about intention, right? There is no sense that those people do it on purpose or do it because they want to do that. They have an agenda. It is that people have to somehow parse through a huge amount of ideas in very little amount of time. And so the normal thing to do is to take shortcuts, right? We all do that. And shortcuts can be any status marker, right? It could be like, oh, I'm going to read that paper because it's coming from Kaisa, and I know Kaisa is really famous, right? Or it's coming from Harvard, or, right? Like any markers of status would be a way to take a shortcut and sort through the like infinite ocean of ideas. And now the question is, does gender serve as such a way to do a shortcut? And it seems that that's what's happening here. That some people at least, use gender as a marker of status and will pay more attention to a paper or an idea if it comes from a man, maybe because they will assume that they don't have that much time and they're focused on what they're more likely to be useful, and they think that it's more likely to be useful if the author is a man than a woman. So going back to your question, any institution, in any situation in which we have a million ideas, and there are so many of them, right? A million potential ideas we could potentially write on or fund or build on. When we use gender as a status marker, we're gonna fall into this, right? So in an ideal world, we would not use gender at all, or any demographics for that sake, right? Like the gender is just one of many potential demographic status markers in order to evaluate ideas. But then what's the alternative? Like, we need to think about like, okay, sure, I don't want to use gender because I know it's bad or whatever. What else do I do? So the alternative is not cheap. So for instance, you think of like our referee system, a journal review system that is all anonymized, and we have people just like giving their time to evaluate each other's papers. It's a very expensive system. But hopefully that means that because of that process, we don't need to go through the status marker, because instead of having to rely on gender, for instance, we're going to just rely on the journal. So we're going to say, okay, reviewers have done their homework. They have actually read the thing. I can just rely on the journal. I don't really care about the gender, right? So you want to give people an alternative that is potentially a better alternative, but that rarely comes for free. So you need to think about it that way, I suppose.
So to think of like how to, so let's say like from the systems perspective, if we want to make change, we can't really tackle individual biases, but we can change the way that they make decisions. So if we offer them more information, that could then serve as a sort of competing signal that could make a difference, like sort of in another sort of signal or cue of quality, perhaps.
Right. So it's not more information. It's the other way around, right? It's
You
more
want less
it's better
information.
shortcuts.
Okay, better shortcuts.
Because the
Yeah.
problem is too much information at the beginning.
Oh, okay. So we were just making the
So you
problem worse.
want shortcuts that are not
Yeah.
depending on demographics.
Yeah.
But are still, that's what we do when we accept some papers and not other in our top journals.
Yeah. So this paper focuses on citations in patents,
Yeah.
correct? Do you think the same idea applies to sort of other related domains like paper citing, papers, or even like to push it a little bit further, like as we are assessing grant applications, do you think the same applies, that we are more likely to pay more attention to applications coming from women? Do you have any data? Do you know of anyone who has done it? Or is this one more to the to-do list for scholars out there?
I think there is a very strong expectation from the literature that scientific papers written by women will get fewer citations, and so that it's also plausible. And I'm sure there are some data showing that grant application from women also are less likely to be funded. Like, unless you're gonna have a specific counteracting mechanism, like, which could be either you anonymize the whole thing and like people don't know who did what, and it's for some reason, if you do that, then that works, right? Then gender won't, you don't know the gender, so you can't use it as a cue. Or you somehow tell the demand side that they need to be aware that this is happening. Every time I get interviewed for the promotion of a female colleague, I tell them, be careful. There are a lot of biases out there. Read my papers. I think having some kind of I don't know. I don't want to say. I guess affirmative action is not a popular word these days, but like that probably should help in terms of having a more level playing field. The question is, like, you don't want to compare, people who don't have the same I don't say selection environment, Darwinian analogy.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the idea of anonymization. It works in journals, right? Like we don't, as reviewers, know whose paper you're reviewing. So it's supposed to be, helping with biases, but it doesn't really work in all contexts. Like if we were to publish papers without names, that is sort of going
Exactly.
against the rules of science.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not very helpful.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem like there is a one fix for all problems.
Exactly.
So
I don't think
yeah,
there is a silver bullet. I think I was taking the example of promotion. Well, promotion, you know who is getting promoted, so
yeah,
there is no way to erase the gender. You're not going to anonymize this easily. But if you're in a big company and you have a lot of ideas, you receive a lot of ideas, then you can absolutely anonymize the ideas, like the authors, and
yeah,
just let people evaluate the ideas for what they are, and at least make it impossible for them to use demographics as a cue to assess the quality.
yeah. So it's time to see if we have any questions from the audience. I think we have a few. Let me quickly check here. Um, and are you looking forward to them?
Yep.
Absolutely. All
Very
right.
much so.
So let's start with a question from Claire, who is asking if you noticed a difference when a female with a doctorate was judging the importance of quality of the abstract. So what she's getting at is the bias driven by the audience? So is it in the eye of the beholder, or are men and women equally biased?
Um, so our results are, I think, my level of confidence in this part of the result is not massive. So I'll tell you exactly what we find, and then we can discuss sort of like what's the right way to interpret it. In the online experiment, which I think is the question is referring to, we find that men and women participants are the same. So women also spend more time reading the abstract when they think it's a man who authored it, and women also feel that like it's more important when the first name is man. So that's for those data. On the twin side, we actually found no effect for women. So the female inventors, and there are not that many of them, which is an issue. The female inventors appear to be citing the twins just as much, whether it's authored by men and women. And the effect is driven really mostly by male inventors, especially all male teams. And you could imagine many reasons why that could be. It could be a story of network. It could be a story of role models. But that's where we're getting to the limitation, the limits of our data.
All right. Well, that is really fascinating, but also speaks to the point you made earlier about internet intentionality, that the fact that you see these biases present uniformly across different genders sort of hints at it. It's something we do without thinking,
Yeah,
and it's just so deeply ingrained
yeah.
in the stereotypes and the structures around that. It's not something that people are doing with any sort of ill will or bad intentions.
And that would be my default. I talked to a lot of, as I mentioned, I did 52 interviews. I talked to many of these people. I really doubt these are. I really doubt that these people like have an agenda to discriminate against women. That's not the kind of people.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, the fact that we see the same thing, the same result when the participants are women, that's also is, yeah, it implies it's something much deeper. It's not politics or agenda. It is a lot. We're overwhelmed. We're all trying to do our job the best, and we take shortcuts all the time, and that's just one of the shortcut we take.
Yeah. All right, we have another question, or maybe more like an observation, but I will rephrase it as a question
Okay.
from Kathy, who is saying great research.
Thank you.
And she's pointing out a similar trend in the business world when we are having meetings in meeting rooms, that it often seems that men's voices are heard more than women's. I think we've all been in a meeting where there is somebody who, comes up with an idea and the room is silent, and then a second person says exactly the same thing, and suddenly it's great idea.
Yeah. Oh God.
And,
I
any
mean,
comment on this one?
I think you actually would know the research on this better than me, but I will tell you that I've never been a woman, but I was a PhD student, and I definitely have felt that. When you're a PhD student and you have an idea, and like no one, like you just share this comment or make this idea, and a few minutes later, a senior person says the exact same thing, and everybody's like, "Oh yeah, that's so smart," etc. This is the most infuriating thing. And based on the research, and again, you probably know it better, I would assume that this is an experience that many women share in the boardroom.
Yeah. So there's a funny anecdote on this. During the first Obama administration, what the women in the White House actually did, they started reinforcing each other's ideas. So in meetings, when one person would suggest something, they had this deal where the next person would say, just to echo what, Michaël just said, and then paraphrase it, but always give credit. So this is something that they found successful, and it sort of changed the sort of the way that people paid attention to ideas. Not sure if that would translate into the world of science and patents, but something to think about as at least as a quick fix in our meetings.
Yeah.
Um, then a question about not to sort of put it on the shoulders of the female academics themselves, but we have a comment that says that there are studies that show that women tend to undersell their ideas. Do you think this has played a role in your paper? So men oversell, like they're better at, being confident about, and whereas women hedge
Yeah.
and don't sell it. Like, does that play a role?
Yeah, so there is a study of promotion world, right? And like someone has looked at how much men and women use very big word to describe their work as really important in the abstract, and they found a gender difference that like women tend to be a lot more self-promotional than women are. We actually went a few steps further, because not only did we do this kind of study in our twin sample, we actually had postdoc. We anonymized the abstract and had 3 postdoc examine everything about the paper. So not just how it was written, also how many experiments were made. Like how robust are the findings? How much do you spend time describing the mechanisms or the results? So very, very deep examine. Actually, that's kind of how the whole project started. Actually, was convinced we find. I told you earlier about something. I thought we would find nothing. We found something. Well, that's the other way around. I actually was very curious about that. I was thinking, okay, maybe men and women, they want to pursue the same idea. They're just gonna go systematically at the idea in a different way. And so that's where we started. So we raised, I think, over 40,000 pounds at the time I started LBS. And we got postdocs from Imperial, UCL, and the local schools kind of like go through anonymized twin papers and established what, along many dimensions, what are the characteristics of each paper. And we found nothing. There was nothing. There was not, we found no difference. At least the gender was not predicting any difference in the number of experiments, how thorough the work was, if it was written one way or the other. It was just like an amazing no results, completely unpublishable. But in the end, it is published because it's part of this. I don't know that people will remember that, but it's in the paper.
A great example of something where it's depressing, but for a different reason. Depressing to spend that much money and not find anything.
Yeah.
But then again, great news that there isn't at least a gender difference in this
In how we do
respect.
science.
How
No.
we do science.
No.
Um,
Not
well,
yeah.
that is fascinating. I think this is maybe something that deserves a paper on its own, or a webinar on its own.
We'll have a webinar.
Absolutely. So to shift the focus from from women and how they sell their ideas, to put the responsibility more on institutions, we have a question from the audience asking if you identified any strategies or policies that could reduce this bias. So in terms of sort of the institutions, is there something that institutions can do to encourage more equitable recognition? Like, we already talked about, the sort of the shortcomings of, taking names off, or, hiding names, but is there anything else that could be done on that level?
There is this paper by Laura Wong, and I'm sure you know her, and Dana Kanze, etc., where they talk about like having more of a promotional, like focusing on the upside of the idea, etc., is one of the things in that study of like entrepreneurial pitches. That was one of the things that like helped correct this gender bias. We are not seeing any of this in our data, but we are not really set up to seeing it either. I think we have two big categories of strategies here. The one day, like on the one hand, it's like we take stock of the fact that this is a very imperfect world, and we try to like find a band-aid. And I think anonymizing ideas is just like a band-aid, right? It's not gonna make the world like it's not gonna change the world in the long term, but it could be a quick fix. You want to evaluate ideas without bias, just make them anonymous. And then there is the more long-term project of living in a fairer society where people don't use gender as a cue for quality. And that goes through role models, that goes through changing people's impression that like ideas, especially about technology, coming from women are somehow less deserving of their attention. And that's, I think, a project that we as instructor can hopefully play a role in fixing. And I make a point on when I teach technology, technology strategy, to bring really brilliant women in my class to serve as role model to women, but also to show both genders that there are people doing incredible things in both genders. And so gender is just not it is not a good cue. If you want to take shortcuts and save time, find something else, just don't use gender. This is more of a long-term project. So I think we should probably try to do both, right? Like let's try to do quick fix for now, and in the long term, just keep reminding people of what incredible women have done and keep doing.
Yeah. I have another really interesting question from the audience. Might be one of your reviewers.
Oh gosh.
So no, hear me out. So there's a question: if you looked at perceptions of academic misconduct as an unconscious bias. So what the person is getting at is that in the recent years, there has been quite a bit of media attention where the people sort of in the middle of the eye of the storm have been female scientists, both on the industry side as well as in academia. There have been some very high-profile cases in academia where female scientists have been accused of wrongdoing, but also on the industry side, there have female entrepreneurs who have been found guilty of claiming to have invented things that aren't actually true.
Elizabeth Holmes, to not name her.
Elizabeth Holmes. So I'm going to add my own part to this question. So it seems that for women, maybe it's not that hard to get attention when it's negative attention.
Oh gosh.
So do you think that there's a bias out there that women scientists, whether they are in the industry or academia, are more likely attract negative attention? And could that have been part of the story? Like, if at the time as you were running the results, like people could have been biased, like, oh, women cannot be trusted because I have been following the news. Good question, but hard to answer, no?
Yeah, I mean, we are totally in the speculation world realm. I mean, I've done some work around the lack of replicability in science, as you know, and I have some ongoing project right now that is looking still at fraud or fabrication of data, or just cutting corners and kind of like pretending things are robust when they are not. I have not seen gender gap
Yeah.
there. That doesn't mean it's not there, but I have not seen in the data I'm using. I tend to have an eye for it. As part of my research is on gender inequality. I haven't seen it.
Well, maybe this is a study you and I should work on.
Exactly.
Like, we could use the same experiment and then tell people that this person has been, found guilty to manipulate their results. What do you think? Here's their grant application. So are men, given benefit of a doubt? Are we more forgiving? Do we punish women more? Who knows?
Fascinating.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Let's
do
get
it.
to work. Let's get to work. Then let me throw another question. We talked a little about this yesterday, but I'm going to do it anyway. So one of the big topics that creeps into almost every discussion we have today is AI. But I'm going to leave it a little bit open there. What do you see is the role of AI sort of going forward? Like, is it something that plays any role in the way that we evaluate science? Is AI itself biased, or could it actually be used to mitigate the problem?
Yeah, my understanding, again, this is not from this study, but from just a general reading of the literature, is that AI has the same bias than we do, right? So my expectation would be fully that AI will have the same bias. So it's in the training data, and so if it's in the training data, it will be in the AI. So I suppose an AI could help us fix it because we could hard code, a bias in favor of women in the AI if we
Yeah.
want to. That doesn't look like the direction of the world these days, but in a way, I suppose that's kind of a question to Sam Altman and all the others who are building the AI of tomorrow. One thing I would note is that the people building this AI future are all men.
All right. So what is the conclusion of that?
um, you know, there's two conclusions, I think. One is about racing behavior, and I have this ongoing project with another amazing PhD student, Shuping, that where we find that when there is more of a race, more of a topic is really hot, then we see gender inequality increase.
And why is that?
Um, my understanding, and this is a very early stage, my understanding is that people just don't have, the less institutions we have, the more inequality, because the less the institutions replace those cognitive institutions, right? When we use gender as a cue, it's because we don't have anything better. And when we have institutions that, like, maybe people's job title or people role or like committees or processes, etc., and that counteracts, then we don't need to do the shortcuts. So the less institutions and the more there is something hot and everybody is like rushing to build the future, there is no institutions. Everybody is like doing shortcut after shortcut because everybody's so busy and racing, etc. Then you fall back into those like more, I guess, cognitive biases. And so that would be my intuition would be that this is why when you see more of a situation of a hot topic of a race, then you should see inequality increase.
Yeah. Which is really curious given the starting example that you had, the vaccine. That was a huge competition, not in the maybe competitive sense between people, but it was something that everybody was trying to urgently solve. So in that sense, it was a race, but it was race against death, if you will.
It was a race that happened way later.
Yeah.
Like much before the race, before COVID, she
Yeah.
tried to raise money for a company. No one wanted to give it to
Yeah.
her. They gave money to the males from Harvard and all the other schools that were starting the Moderna
Yeah.
and the other, right? So it was always the men who have really led the forefront of the technology, and in
Yeah.
part it could be because women are not. There is no level playing field here, and so when things go very fast and you don't have a level playing field, then you expect inequality to increase.
Yeah. So going back to the AI though, like, we've had a back and forth. Like, I may have a slightly less cynical view. Maybe I'm
Good.
the optimist in this one, which
Good.
is not my natural state of mind. Sure, like we know that, algorithms are just as biased as we make them to be. When we talk about LLMs, it's all about the training data, so it should not be a huge surprise if what we train them on is already biased. But a lot more, an increasing number of companies and nonprofits, other institutions, agencies are building their internal tools based on AI. For example, here at INSEAD, we are building different bots to understand our travel policy, or other things like it's a internally trained LLM where you can then say like, can you explain, what I should be doing in this situation? Could that be a potential sort of an opening, for funding agencies or let's say patent examiners, that we would train those types of tools to be more mindful or even look for alternatives?
Yeah, absolutely. I look, I study technology and I teach technology and innovation because I'm interested in building a better world, right? It's about what is the innovation is the world we want to build. And so as we live through a revolution with AI, the sense is that there is an opportunity to build a better world, right? There's also an opportunity to build a worse world.
Yes.
Because we're not protected by those institutions and the built-in inertia of that old world. But this is a little bit of an open space, and so those of us who want to build a world that is going to be more fair, well, we have a shot at doing this. But not everybody agrees on what the world is that we want to build, and so it gets about politics because we don't have institutions.
Yeah. Oh, now I'm getting depressed again.
No, no.
So, what else do you have cooking? You just mentioned the project with one of your doctoral students,
Yeah.
Shuping. Anything else that you might want to share? Something
I didn't have that
exciting
question.
in
Yeah, so I have actually a quite relevant paper with another PhD student at INSEAD, and his name is Kaushik, and where we look at the impact of these paradigm shifts in technology, which we measure through the emergence of disasters. So think about Hurricane Katrina, or the present oil spill, or some pandemic, or Fukushima, or tsunamis, etc. Right? So those are really big shocks that open a lot of opportunity for innovation, because when there is a new problem, there is an opportunity to create new solutions, and so those are innovations. And so what we wanted to do is to look at who benefits when there is a shock like this and who loses more. We have a lot of the literature would I suppose predict that those who are rich will have more. That we call it the Matthew effect. But it's also possible then when we have this big moment of revolution, exactly the opposite happens, and we find the opposite happens, right? So we find that when there is this big shift like this with a lot of new opportunities that did not exist before, then people who previously had very low status do a lot better than when there is no shock. And so we call that status elevator. So what we find is that low status people can use the emergence of new fields as status elevator, hop on a new field, and as the field becomes high status, they themselves gain status and are able to have a bigger impact on the field.
Well, at least now we're into an uplifting
No.
ending. All right, we're getting close to the end of our time here. Anything that you want to say for people who are listening out there, whether they're scientists, innovators, people working in these agencies, institution builders, a quick last word.
Yeah. So I think three key ideas that I would love people to remember from that research, which took me years. This is not a quick study. The first one is that when we think about innovation, we think about ideas. And I think it's important to remember that innovation is not just about ideas. Ideas are not enough, right? You need to pay attention to the right ideas, and the allocation of attention is something that we should care about. That's number one. Number two, and that I make a very big point when I teach innovation to my students, is that there is no level playing field. This is not a level playing field. don't think it is, right? So some people are at an advantage when it comes to building the future over others, and that's just the way it is. That we do what, if you want to fight against that, then you should, and I try, but at least don't think that this is a level playing field. And the third thing, and I think try to be positive or to make lemonade out of lemon here. There is this idea out there that if you want to fight for equality, you're fighting somehow against progress, right? You have to pick progress or equality. And I think what our study shows is that that's not true at all, right? In this case, we're leaving money on the table, right? There are Marie Curies that we don't have, that we could have had. Like imagine if we had imagine all the famous guy scientists, like the Einstein of the world. Imagine that there were just as many girls that could have produced incredible insight, and we don't have them. And we don't have them, why? Because we don't pay attention to those ideas. And so we're leaving money on the table. We could have a fair world and also increase the pace of change and increase innovation. And so I hope that our paper will just provide a way to get there.
Well, let's hope that. Thank you for sharing your research, Michaël. Thank you for the audience for being with us today. Thank you for the great questions. And that's it from us today. Thank you.
Thank you.